This is my coworker Ari. He's our one of our product. What is your title?
I'm a product strategist here at Philosophy. Hi, I'm Ari.
And I'm Wai Yin, a developer.
So this topic is really about when you have to work with some of these non-dev folks, and you're like, oh no, what now? What am I going to do? How difficult is this going to be? How easy is this going to be? And Wyatt and I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk about this together because Wyatt and I worked on a number of projects this year. When we started, it was our first project together. So we've had an interesting learning curve in the last sort of 6 months maybe, on how to communicate between each other and do some pretty cool work. So who are the sort of non-dev types you might encounter typically on some of the work you're going to be doing? Product managers are definitely one of them, or project managers, depending on the company you're at or consultancy you're at. The title has different nuances depending where you are, but I'm not going to get into that. It's not that important. They're just leading projects really or managing it. Or you can be collaborating with a lot of designers or a designer. And the other big person in this sort of realm is your client or your client stakeholder, depending on the project. So these are the types you typically encounter. I don't think there's any others you might run into, maybe, but these are the ones you typically encounter. So here's what we've learned, and maybe you might want to speak a little bit to that as we work together. Yeah, this would be interesting to hear about from you, like technical jargon.
Sure. One thing, as an engineer, you're gonna know a lot of tech words, and then when but then that's great for your job to get the job. But then once you have the job, you have to kind of forget about the tech words and be able to actually explain your things in non-tech way, in non-techy talk, so that the other members of your team understand what you talk. So you have a dual role of sometimes you need to be all techie, you do all the fancy words like right now you don't necessarily know, but you will. And then the other time you're going, oh, I'm back to where I was like a year ago when I was like, well, I just want to build the thing. I don't know what the actual tech word is, but you just want to build the thing. And like how you were describing your app during your project presentation of features, and I wanted to do that. Don't forget that step once you become a developer, because that's how that's the kind of language you're going to need to talk to designers, clients, and your product people to explain the features in a non-tech way.
Yeah, a good example is, I don't have any screens from it, but Wyatt and I worked on a tool for a company that was working on if you could text in recycling orders, right? And your trash hauler in your local area would come get it. And there was a tremendous amount of automation that they wanted to build into this messaging flow that was going to happen. And I think on the first few times we talked about it, Wyatt would tell me like the technical components of how it's set up, and I'd be like, okay, wait, I don't even understand like the first half of what you told me at all. But very quickly what we learned was try and focus on the what, the why, and the how of a feature in user story, right? So when you look at a user story, think about what it has to do, but also why it's doing that. And that ties back to maybe some of the research you've gotten to be able to do alongside your product person to uncover why you're doing this feature for the user, what it's for. And then when you talk about the how, kind of frame it in the context of knowing that your non-dev team members are primarily interested in this sort of front-end user experience. So they'll go like, well, we know that when they press this, it's got to do this, and this, I want to see this result for the user because this is what they're trying to accomplish. That's really what they want to hear, is you saying like, well, if you want it to go from this point to this, the complexity of that is, here's the complexity of doing that, right? And just to give them a general understanding of what is needed to get the flow that they want executed. And try and talk them through it in like real, like if you were talking, like the best example I have is like if you can explain it to a friend and they can go, oh, I can kind of understand what you mean, how the user is going to get from point A to point B, that works, and that's kind of what they're looking for, because they trust you to execute on it. Yeah. So that kind of ties into this idea of come up with options, right? I think often I come to you and I go like, this is what we're trying to accomplish. Could you point me in the direction of a couple of recommendations or execution suggestions? And give me the risks that are associated with that. And we can work together on that, right? Like, I think like on CSCI, you tell me like for this feature, if you went up, like Wayne would often tell me this, she'll say, okay, this is what you want the user to do, right? This is what you want to get. I'm like, yeah. And she'll go, okay, if you want to do that, this is how much work it takes. So you may want to actually figure out that pain point's worth this amount of work and time, right? And then I would have to look at, okay, what does that mean for cost? All right, if this is the level of effort, and then that's the cost involved with that. Okay, maybe I should reevaluate with the client. Is this a priority feature? Does it actually serve what the user needs? Yeah, so cost is important. But often that's what Wayne's doing for me. She's framing it in a way that I don't, like I may not necessarily have the insight into. Like I can say, yeah, I want to automate the flow of this text messaging flow from point A to point F. And then Wayne will say, well, you know that involves like the Twilio talking to the facial rec software. What are the risks of you trying to hook up those two third-party integrations to do these things? I may not necessarily recognize those facts, and I rely on my engineer and trust my engineer to help me assess those risks. Anything else to get in there?
I think this is part of, you might not be able to do this like in your first week at your first job, because you're like, I'm just trying to make the thing run, okay? But as you get more experience, then you'll go, oh, I could do it this way or this way. But if I do it this way, this will take 3 days. If I do it this way, it'll take 3 weeks. And then you just present it to the product manager and the client and go, which one do you want? Because because sometimes it's like, well, this feature isn't really that important. So the client go, okay, I'll take the 3-day one. But if it's like really important, central to their idea, then they'll, okay, I'll do the 3-week one. And that's where you're the only person on that team who can provide that. Because the client and the product manager, they just go, well, I need this feature. But you give them the options, and that's where your engineering background and your creativity kind of blend in, and where understanding what the user needs is important. Because in some jobs, they'll just tell you, here's a story, do it. Okay, and then you just do it. But as an engineer, if like you are more involved in the user discussion and understanding the problem, then you could go, okay, this is what the story says, but actually you could have done this way versus this way and give them more options. So that's why understanding not only the story they said this is what we need, but understanding why you need it. Because as the product people or the client who are asking for this, they don't know, they just thought, oh, there's only one option. So that's kind of where it comes from.
No, you're right. And I was thinking about like if you're new and maybe, or even if you're just interfacing with a client, there's no product team with you or designer, one of the things you can do to help with this is try and write the stories with your client. It's their product, right? And you want to build that relationship and cut that sort of friction of you having to figure out stories based on like a bunch of like feature ideas that drop your way, and just say, hey, one of the ways we can make sure that you're never blindsided and we all are on the same page, and I know you understand and I know I understand, is to write the stories together, which is super helpful. Which, yeah, kind of talks about collaboration. Try and write your user stories, define your acceptance criteria and QA steps together with your product and project managers. We do that all the time. So Wayne and I will come in, we'll have a discussion, we'll talk about what we're trying to accomplish with the user, and then we'll write those stories together. Wayne will highlight risks for me and the client. We'll define what the acceptance criteria are together. Wayne's very good at writing QA steps, which I'm terrible at, and I've had to learn from her. Which is very helpful because one of the things you're going to want, regardless of whether you have a product with you or not, is for your client to QA with you. And clients will have no clue. Like right now, I have a client who, the other day, they're working with another engineering team, but I'm leading their product side, and the client, I discovered they weren't giving a QA sense, and she had no clue, like, what do I QA, right? Like there is, and giving someone like, okay, click this, and it's supposed, does it do this? And if it does, great, pass. If it doesn't, move it down back to, to the bug side of the trouble board. Can be super helpful. And avoiding any of that confusion again when we're together. Be on the same page for a user story. Try to use the same language as you start working together. Wine's now gotten used to some of the things where it used to confound. I'd say things and she'd be like, yes, but I don't, what do you want? We've gotten better at doing that. Definitely avoid assumptions. There are times where I make an assumption of how something could be done, or how easy it might be to be done, or hard, and gut check with each other. And also vice versa, like there may be something where you might feel like, well, this doesn't seem like the level of effort is necessary for what you're trying to accomplish. Maybe we should push this down, but it could be a non-negotiable for your client, and you may not know. So just avoid those assumptions. And ask all the clarifying questions. I ask Wayne a lot of stupid questions every day, just because I'm trying to clarify things. I know it took me a while to get used to it. I was very nervous about asking my engineers things that made me look stupid, and then have them go, why are you trying to build this for this? And your clients might feel that way sometimes, right? They might be a little intimidated. They might feel like, oh, this engineer's going to tell me, don't worry about it. You'll get what you want. So be aware of that, and let them ask, encourage them to ask those questions.
And one of the advantage of working closely with the client and having them ask you a question is to make sure that they get the thing that they actually want. What happens sometimes with that, where I've heard a client had bad experiences, they paid some person to build a thing, the person goes, builds the thing, and 3 months later presents it to the client. Never talk to the client in between, and then the client goes, I don't know how to use this, this isn't what I wanted. So as you get to different jobs, that's why you should talk to them and go, always, is this what you want? Okay, I built the thing, oh, this is how you use it. And if they go, well, that's not what I want, and this is very confusing to use it, and that's when that's kind of the client user feedback of, okay, how can I rethink this, whether it's a design decision or engineering part, to work together and make it sure that the client knows how to use the thing that you built.
Yeah, we would do weekly reviews with, on that trash hauling thing, the recycling way. Every week we get our stakeholders and say, here's the latest build, go play with it. Go try and break it. Go do all these things, and just tell us everything you find. Kind of giving them visibility into things all the time. Because the flip side of it, I've had clients where we've gone away for 2 weeks to work on a bunch of features. We come back and then we're like, well, this wasn't what I was thinking about. Definitely ship weekly. Yeah.
Even in my very limited experience, I've given a client what they wanted, and they're like, you know what? Now that I see it, that's really not what I wanted.
Yeah, and that's a huge gotcha sometimes. I have a client right now who's very visually driven. So even when I'm sharing Bootstrap HTML build for them, I'm just focus on functionality. Does everything do what it's supposed to do? But the questions I'm getting are never about that. The questions I'm getting is so is that menu bar going to look no, just focus on functionality. Yeah, is it going to be that blue and stuff? And so there's an element of educating and coaching your client along the way that comes with it. And you're lucky if you have a team and you can all do it together. But if you're by yourself, you want to integrate that sort of thing into your work where by the time the project ends, your client should be a pretty good product person. That's kind of a great thing as an engineer if you can do that, because then it means that the next bit of work you do together is going to be tremendously efficient, fun, all those things. So yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. So what we essentially do is, I'll move to the next slide next. But so let's say the feature is, as a user, when I click submit, I want the admin to be notified on the admin portal and for a note for the for the order to move up into pending, right, on the directory page. So Wyatt and I might write, okay, number one, log into this instance, right? Number two, okay, click, look in directory and see which one is pending. Click into it. Number three, hit submit. Now go back to the directory page, see if the order has moved into pending, right? Now, number five, log into your admin instance, see if the admin has received it. If yes, move to pass QA. If not, move it back to the bugs. And then write replication steps of how you got to the bug. That's kind of how we do it. Like very simple language, step by step, so the client can see, yep, it does what it needs to do. And so we know. Because the QA process we use here typically is that I will QA, Wyan will QA, or the engineer will QA, and then I will, as the product person, I'll get the stakeholder or client to QA as well. So we do it like there's 3 people QAing the story at any given point before we move on. Yeah. Depends on the project. So a good example is JD. JD's a pretty senior here. A recent project he did, he was leading the project because there was no product we really needed on it for a section of it, and so he was client facing, he was dealing with the client. So it really depends. But we also have an expectation, at least a philosophy. What we do is we believe that everyone on the team can interface and lead the client in different ways at any given point. So I recommend you, and I've actually got a bit where I'm going to talk about how you want to encourage yourself to interface with your clients. Yeah.
And this particular workflow is particular to us. This is how we work. If you work at a big company, big or different companies, then you'll probably just do the engineering stuff and someone else will take care of the client and do the user stuff. So it depends on where you work. And it also depends on what you like. So if this idea of talking to the client terrifies you, don't work here.
Yeah, don't
work somewhere else. But I don't want you to think, oh man, I wanted to be an engineer to avoid people, and all she keeps telling me is that I have to talk to people. So that's not always true. This is particular to this company because they're sponsoring this, so I have to hey, this is the best way. But it's not, it's one way. But don't get too freaked out if you're like, I don't like people. Why does she keep talking about this?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is if you have to choose one person that you had to talk to, pick your product person on your team. Especially if it's a big company, okay, you may not talk to the client. At least try and try and give yourself an hour with them. And if that has to be the only time you interact with someone, do that. That's the one person. But this idea of being bold. As a product person, I love working. The best engineers I work with and have worked with are people who don't just want a backlog of things to do, right? The brilliant, JD's a great example. JD's the kind of guy who, if I give him a user story, his first question is, well, why? Why this, right? And that's interesting. The best engineers are as creative as product or design, 100%. Same thing, Wyan, when I work with Wyan, a lot of time that we spend talking is about, well, why are we doing this? Let's talk through other ways we could execute this. Are there more interesting flows that we could look at? It's not always design or product who has to drive that. We have a client right now where we're doing some very interesting work around people in lines who are, and how to manage this kind of things. And it's engineering who's actually driving the conversation and not really product, because engineering is coming and saying, there are these things we can do with beacons, there are these things that we can do with facial rec, and if we're thinking about these technologies, then, hey, design product, what can we do together? And those are the best engineers to work with. So, and part of that is being okay with spending time with the problem that you're trying to solve without racing for the solution. And it's a hard thing to do sometimes. You may not necessarily have the time to do that. Your client may be pushing you to, but as much as you can, just think about the problem and spend time with it, and don't automatically go, I gotta have a solution within a week. one of the things I mean, we're lucky we can do it here, but like I like to say to my teams is, first 2 weeks you won't know anything. You don't. The first 2 weeks is trying to figure out like what exactly is it, and that sometimes it's hard because your client's like, well, I'm paying you. What are you doing? And the way you can maybe work around it sometimes, like here, I know like when the engineers need just a bit of time to research around the problem, they set up all the stuff that's necessary, right? So we'll set up like if there's an AWS account, all the the backbone of what is pretty much similar in every project. Do that so your client has some visibility into, oh, they're making some progress, but also get by yourself an hour a day or something just to think on the problem, because the things that will come out of that, you'll be surprised. Like you will come up with solutions that if you jump to the first like, oh right, this we did it this way in the last build, on the last product, and it works. We'll just use that. And it can happen. I do it sometimes. I was in a meeting the other day and I say, oh, why don't we just do this? We did this on the last product. It's the same sort of flow. And then I had to stop myself because I was like, well, no, that's not the point. Which ties back to being collaborative. Your thoughts on this?
I agree.
And this, yeah, I think Wayne, you and I have talked about this before. I'll just gloss over it and let you talk about it in more detail. But band together, like your non-dev female colleagues, where you will be, will need as much support and as much collaboration as well. I learned this from you, like
When we talk about this
we
stuff.
talked about this, right? And you might want to talk about this more than yeah.
Yeah, it sounds weird for you to talk about my experience.
I know, it's strange.
So actually, while working here, there were like 2 instances I can think of where a client or a coworker who were females asked me tech questions, and I was probably the most junior out of our 7 developers, and they asked me because I was female, because it's kind of, you might feel a little embarrassed and intimidating admitting to a guy developer who is like, I don't actually know what you're doing. So they might ask you because they'll go, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but you won't make me feel bad. You won't you won't mansplain it to me. So you might come in instances while you're working that happens. So just, I think now he's part of other developers, but other non-developer females that you might come across. And yeah, so let's see.
Yeah, and
That's the first 3 points.
And then I when you told me all that stuff, I thought of that phrase like, don't let the bastards get you down. And I saw that in The Handmaid's Tale the other day, and I thought, I love that. That should be in there. Perfect. Yeah, questions. It's probably how I will be more helpful.
Simple question.
Yeah.
What is your background and how did you get to where you are today?
Oh man, that's a story. I always like to say I ended up here by accident. So I come from a writing background, and I still do, for like, screenplays and stuff. And when I moved to the mid version, without being too long, is I moved from London to New York. And when I was in New York, I got into advertising as a copywriter, and then ended up as a strategist. And then as a strategist, like a digital strategist, which then somehow or other I ended up as a management consultant. I still don't know how I did that, but I ended up as a management consultant. And when I was a management consultant, it was becoming apparent to me that a lot of the boutique management consultancies, as they did work for their clients, which was very like org design, team building stuff, which was typically around an initiative or a product that a company had, right? So a company like a Nike or someone would call a boutique management consultancy in and say, hey, we're going to build this thing, this platform, this tool. How do we organize our teams around it and stuff? And also a lot of these management consultancies as a sort of revenue model were attempting to build products, right? Either calendar tools for organizational development, these kind of things. And I also was beginning to see product companies or innovation firms like Philosophy moving into work where yes, you were building something, but your client was beginning to ask you about how do you build a team, or how do you hire for this? How do you build a team internally to do this work? And that's kind of how I ended up here. I'd met Scott and we talked, and I think both of us, he could see the direction philosophy was heading in, and it felt like a fit, and that's how I ended up here. So I often tell people, don't try and train for it. Like, and it's funny, the best that strategy firm I worked with, the management consultancy firm I worked with in New York, everyone was under 30. No one had an MBA. And the clients were GE, Pepsi, major clients, but it was because people had been hired. I mean, they hired really well, but they were hiring people who could solve problems in interesting ways because they came from diverse backgrounds. So that's kind of how I got here. Any other questions?
What is that firms like McKinsey?
Right, so McKinsey is a traditional consulting company, right? But a lot of these big companies now have these digital departments, right? Who are beginning to move into that kind of work where they will come in and do experience mapping and pull out what the products are from that. So that's kind of where they sit, and they'll have engineers. They'll have teams internally that are building products or innovation, for innovation departments at big firms. So there is a emerging. That's a good example of where, the big four have identified our product's going to be a huge thing. I need to start building teams internally that can do that kind of work.
Do you think that those companies are actually phased out in some ways?
I don't know, that the industry changes so quickly. Like, even some of the work I got to do like 5 years ago, you can't even sell that kind of work anymore. Nobody wants it. It's moved so much. But they're great places. I mean, those kind of places are great for experience, right? It's great if you're going in for your first, it's good for experience. You'll work on a ton of clients. Don't spend too long there. You'll burn out. You'll eventually not be doing that great work. But it's a good place to begin a career and kind of build a reputation in your resume that pushes you out to more interesting places. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. How you? Oh, right. Yeah.
What?
How you got here?
I drove a car. Not the day. You ask an engineer how they got here. I told you how I got here. What's the problem? Yes. Would you like to rephrase your question, or you want me to be less sarcastic?
You have an interesting story, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. The two careers I have tried, I started both of them as a hobby. So I was in college, was watching TV, saw someone started cutting paper. So I started cutting paper, and then I became a packaging engineer, packaging designer kind of thing, made pop-ups. And I was doing that during the day. I was like, well, I'm at home. I'm in Connecticut. Connecticut's boring. What am I going to do? So I'm going to learn how to code as a hobby. So I did that. So I learned HTML, CSS, PHP, MySQL, regex, all this stuff, deploying, FTP. I learned a little bit of version control, but not as much. But all this was as a hobby. I had no intention whatsoever of making any money out of it. Even though I knew some people were making money, I was like, I like my day job. And then one day, it's like my day job wasn't doing too well, so I was like, okay, let's see if I can turn my hobby again into a career. So went to boot camp to do that, and then what I learned at the boot camp was I kind of knew this stuff. And then I started working here about 2 years ago.
Wasn't there something about Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
No, Veronica Mars.
Veronica Mars.
I actually did like a fan site for Veronica Mars,
Yeah.
and that's what we had to build, like a custom site for that. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then I did so I was like live coding that site. So that's what got me interested, because that was a hobby, and that's why I told people, what do you want to build? build projects something you like, because if you like it, then you'll want to improve on the thing that you like, and that helps a lot. That's one of the things that help why I kept learning more stuff, even though I had no intention of making money from it, from coding, was because I had a problem and I wanted to solve it, and so I just improved because I had an idea and I wanted to improve on it.
Yeah, that's true. That's the best way. I didn't think I could make money off what, like I remember being in London and my wife and I sometimes joke, she was like, once upon a time you said like I have all these ideas and I could solve problems, but who's going to pay me to figure it out? And I did, like, and I never thought it would be a career, but you're right. Like if you focus it on like what you love, then it'll figure itself out.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Any more questions for you?
So was that better than the driving story?
Yeah, I'm still waiting for my question.
How did they convince the companies to hire you?
I sent in a resume. I answered questions. No, it's really, it's like, I sent in a resume. I don't know why out of the dozens or hundreds of resumes they picked mine. I didn't ask, but I did I had one interview and I did well enough. And then, but they weren't hiring at the time. Second interview, coding challenge. They send me a coding exercise. They go, okay, I can do that. And they send me, oh, can you do it in Ruby? I'm like, I haven't touched Ruby in a year and a half. And I only learned it like for 1 month when I was applying for boot camp. So I was trying to get a job where I had to basically learn a language to do the coding exercise in 4 days. So I spent Friday and half a Saturday learning Ruby, and then half Saturday and Sunday doing the coding exercise and submitted it. So that's how I think the fact that I was willing to jump through the hoop of going, okay, you want this in Ruby? Okay, I'll try to do it in Ruby, is what kind of helped get the job, of you taking the extra step of doing the extra step. Because I'm sure a lot of people would have gone, yeah, I'm not doing that. I don't know the language.
I also know now, like when I've participated in because when we interview even our engineers, we have a balanced team interview, and I know the engineering team has certain criteria that they look at for them to meet, but I know for the product and design teams we're looking for the collaboration sense. So if we're looking at it, if we get the sense that you're someone who just wants a backlog and to work off it, then we may think like, okay, but because of the structure in which we work here, where it's always a mixed team, will you be able to like collaborate, etc. So I know we look for that, but not to the point that we're like, oh, if you're someone who doesn't want to talk to anyone, we're not going to hire you. But like the other, the skills take precedence. But definitely those kind of factors, at least when I've participated, have come into play.
And I've also heard stories from other hiring people who said, oh, the engineer was brilliant code-wise, but they can't talk at all, not even to other engineers. So they're going, we can't hire that person, because even if they don't like to talk to clients, you have to be able to talk to the other engineers. So I think the idea is like, I know most of you don't come from a CS background, and that's fine. You have your own skill sets, and kind of bring that into play. Like I was a designer, packaging designer. Probably a lot of tech companies, they saw that in my resume, go pass, pass, pass. But then this was one of the companies that go, huh, that sounds interesting. And I ended up working here. So it's bring whatever you have into your resume and and highlight what you're already good at in addition to this. Because it takes a lot more than just coding to be a successful engineer.
I'm going to let, I think you have the next
That's
person
good.
now.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.